During my 6-week stay at the hospital, I was introduced to a talent I didn't know I had. Do you remember a time in your life when you went through a difficult trial and found something positive as a result of that hardship? For me, just as clay can be molded from its original form into something unique, my trial molded me into a unique individual. I want to share with you the 3 characteristics of clay, which are patience, creativity, and individuality, and how I personally relate to them. Now, I'll tell you about how I relate to the first characteristic. The first characteristic is patience. When you work with clay, you must have the patience to finish the idea. The sculptures that I make are a bit smaller than the size of my palm. They're also time-consuming because of the minute details. You must have a steady hand to do precise work with clay. It also helps to have sculpting tools to use when your fingers are too big. An example would be this beach with a person laying on a beach towel that I'd made. It also has a beach ball and a dog on it. Well, you must also be patient when you make mistakes, even if they're big ones. You must have the patience to not get so frustrated that you scrap the idea. Sometimes it can be hard not to scrap it. You must be able to fix your mistake and continue with the sculpture. An example would be if you're almost done with a sculpture and you make a mistake. You do your best to fix it. Sometimes it'll work, sometimes it won't. But you still have to persevere through the mistakes. Now that I've gone through patience, I will talk about creativity. I feel like when you work with clay, you must have a creative mindset and to be able to think of new ideas. For instance, when you mold clay, you have to have an idea of what to do first. You can get inspiration from anywhere. You just have to look. Some of the places I recommend are your memories or Pinterest. Then, once you have your inspiration, you can come up with more things to do with it. One of my favorite ideas I had for a sculpture was making a replica of a lighthouse in Santa Cruz that I used to visit with my aunt. During my stay at the hospital, I had to think of creative ways to pass the time. One of the ideas that I had was to build Lego sets. Some of the doctors were impressed by them. One of my doctors also loved building giant Lego sets. One of the ones that I remember was the Sydney Opera House in Australia. Another way, like I said before, was sculpting with clay. One time I had very little clay to work with, so I made a sleeping bag and a blanket. At the end, I was left with a little bit of clay a bit smaller than my finger. So I decided to make a tiny duffel bag with it. Now that I've told you about creativity, I will tell you about individuality. The first characteristic I feel like I have in common with clay is individuality. There are no 2 sculptures that are alike. Even if you were to have the same amount of clay for both sculptures, the way you mold it might be different. For example, let's say you're building 2 trees and you got the trunks and branches the same, but one has more leaves than the other. Or the trunks could be different height. Every piece is different, and I think that's what makes it special. Just like that sculpture, when I came out of the hospital, I was a different person, not just figuratively, but quite literally. Figuratively, I feel like my stay at the hospital made me more mature. I had learned how to deal with the difficulties that came up after my hospital stay. As for the literally part, my body was very different when I came out of the hospital. Then, after a while, I had to go back to finish the process to fix my body. After the entire process was done, I realized how much it had molded me into a unique individual. The things I just talked about are the reasons why I relate to the characteristics of clay: patience, creativity, and individuality. Without my stay at the hospital, I would not be who I am today. I also probably would not have discovered the type of clay and style that I use. I most likely would not have found out some of who I am. Sometimes, when I look at my sculptures, I'm thankful that I got a blessing out of my trial.